Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. Join me for discussions of the Outlander book series by Diana Gabaldon, the television series, and anything interesting that falls between. This is podcast episode 147, and we are in week 32 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. This week we're covering chapters 63 through 65, and I'm calling it New Life and Returning Home. And the summary goes something like this. Brianna was angry about Jocasta's will. Lord John had a plan just in case. Brianna feared how things would be between her and Roger if he came back. Only 2 writers returned. Brianna forgave Jamie. Claire assessed John. Brianna went into labor. Jamie and Claire supported her. A healthy baby was born. The Frasers and Lord John left River Run. They happily returned to Fraser's Ridge. Roger was nearby. He was committed and ready. Inside the chapters. Chapter 63, Forgiveness. River Run, May 1770. Brianna was in a huff over Auntie Jo's stubborn refusal to change her will. Lord John to Brianna, pot, meat, kettle. John believed doing nothing was the answer. To begin with, I should be extremely surprised if your aunt were not immortal. Several of that particular race of Scots seem to be. However, he waved a hand in dismissal, should this prove untrue, and should she persist in her delusions that you would prove a good mistress to River Run? John went on to explain if Jocasta died, leaving the plantation to Brianna, he would buy her slaves and free them in Virginia, and she would return his money, thus fixing the problem. He slyly made another point along the way. At this point, you will be totally destitute and lacking in property, which appears to be your chief desire, second only to preventing any possibility of personal happiness by ensuring that you cannot marry the man you love. She pleated a handful of muslin between her fingers, frowning at the big sapphire that shone on her hand. I promised I'd listen to him first. She cast a narrow eye at Lord John. Though I still say it's emotional blackmail. So much more effective than any other kind, he agreed. Almost worth a cracked pate to finally hold the whip hand on a Fraser. He's got her where he wants her. Yes, it's very difficult to get the upper hand on a Fraser, isn't it? Brianna asked and inferred that Lord John could never care for a child who wasn't his own. So how could Roger be expected to? He told her for the sake of the parent, and he'd been doing that very thing for some time. Brianna misinterpreted it to mean her he was caring for because of her father. Tell me, he said without opening them, why is it that you seem so convinced that a man could not care for a child unless it were the fruit of his loins? As it is, my dear, I did not mean to refer to you when I said I'd been doing such a thing myself. My son, my stepson, is in fact the son of my late wife's sister. By tragic accident, both of his parents died within a day of each other, and my wife Isabel and her parents raised him from babyhood. I married Isabel when Willie was 6 or so. So you see, there is no blood between us at all, and yet, were any man to impugn my affection for him, or to say he is not my son, I would call him out on the instant for it. Go, Lord John. Go tell Brianna. Upon deeper reflection, Brianna was worried about the intimacy between her and Roger. I didn't know Jamie Fraser was my father, she said. Not all the time I was growing up. After the rising, my parents were separated. They each thought the other was dead, and so my mother married again. I thought Frank Randall was my father. I didn't find out otherwise until after he died. Ah, and was this Randall cruel to you? No, he was. Wonderful. Her voice broke slightly, and she cleared her throat, embarrassed. No, he was the best father I could have had. It's just that I thought my parents had a good marriage. They cared for each other. They respected each other. Well, I thought everything was fine. Lord John scratched at his bandages. The doctor had shaved his head, a condition which, in addition to affronting his vanity, itched abominably. I fail to see the difficulty as applied to your present situation. She heaved a huge sigh. Then my father died, and we found out that Jamie Fraser was still alive. My mother went to join him, and then I came. And it was different. I saw how they looked at each other. I never saw her look at Frank Randall that way, or him at her. Ah, yes. A small gust of bleakness swept through him. He'd seen that look once or twice, the first time he had wanted desperately to put a knife through Claire Randall's heart. Do you know how rare such a thing is? He asked quietly, that peculiar sort of mutual passion. The one-sided kind is common enough. Yes. The thing is, I think I had it. For a little while, a very little while. She turned her head and looked at him with eyes that let him see clear through her. If I've lost it, then I have. I can live with that, or without it. But I won't live with an imitation of it. I couldn't stand that. I love the ease of conversation and the sharp wit of Lord John. Brianna was raped. There is a level of worry whether or not she can sexually be with Roger. Could he accept her if he couldn't touch her? Could she ask such a sacrifice of him? She knows healing can take place because of Jamie being able to have a full relationship with her mother. But it's difficult. Brianna seems to hold on to the most negative outcome possibilities, I think as a way to guard and prepare herself, just in case. Poor dear. Only 2 riders were seen by the servants. Brianna thought it must be Jamie and Claire. So many thoughts were running through Brianna's mind. Was Roger not found? They found him and he didn't want to come back. She jokes to Lord John about him being her fallback. Lord John came up with other scenarios in which young Ian and Roger rode separately from her parents. John proceeded to ask Brianna how far her remorse went for almost getting him killed. She colored and looked uncomfortable. What do you mean? If I ask you to do something you do not wish to, will your sense of guilt and obligation compel you to do it nonetheless? Oh, more blackmail. What is it? She asked wearily. Forgive your father, whatever has happened. For your sake as well as his, he said. I already have. Her lashes covered her eyes as she looked down. Her hands lay still in her lap, the blue fire of a sapphire glowing on her finger. The sound of hooves came clearly through the open French doors, rattling on the gravel drive. Then I think you had better go down and tell him so, my dear. Oh, Lord John is a sweet one. Out of the room, she flew to greet her father. Lord John was the wise and caring friend Brianna needed. Like Claire, Diana describes Brianna about nature, a storm cloud in this instance. Cue to Claire as she examined Lord John. When we heard that there were 2 riders coming, and one of them Jamie, we feared lest something had happened to your nephew, or Mackenzie. Somehow it occurred to neither of us to think that anything had happened to you. I'm immortal, she murmured, peering alternately into his eyes. Didn't you know? He asked after Mackenzie. She assured him Roger would come along later. Lord John is not convinced. Claire had faith in Roger returning. Without asking, Claire opened John's shirt to listen to his heart, lungs, and abdomen. Why would John be surprised by this gesture? She manhandles anyone needing medical attention. When she asked if he had moved his bells, he downright refused to answer. And then John looked her over. She looked more outrageous even than usual. The woman must be 40 at least, yet she showed no more sign of age than a fine webbing of lines at the corners of her eyes and threadings of silver in the ridiculous mass of hair. She was thinner than he remembered, though it was hard to judge of her figure dressed as she was in a barbaric leather shirt and trouserings. She'd plainly been in the sun and weather for some time. Her face and hands had baked a delicate soft brown that made the big golden eyes that much more startling when they turned full on one, which they now did. I think he was admiring her and at the same time looking for anything to critique in a bitchy and catty way. They're not adversaries, they're definitely friends, but there's still this tug between them. There's that tension that's always there. And both of them can't help being snarky to the other. Like, they can't. I could imagine them tweeting each other and how hilarious it would be. Claire wanted to get a look at the trepanation site and was unusually delicate in the asking because she was curious. And Lord John's response was, "Beyond the state of my bowels, I have no secrets from you, madam." I love that line so much. That should be like hashtags, no secrets. So good. That line is quintessential Lord John. As Claire examined his head, she thanked him for helping Brianna while they were gone. John was pleased to have helped, even if it cost him a hole in the head. John worried for the state of Brianna and Jamie's relationship. Claire instructed him to look into the garden. All was well between the father and daughter. Claire thought Brianna would deliver soon, and John professed his thankfulness at their return. "I confess to some gratitude at your prompt arrival," he said, letting her ease him back onto the pillows and smooth his bedding. "I've barely survived the experience of being your daughter's nursemaid. I fear serving as her midwife would finish me completely." If you have read any of the other books, okay, the side series, Lord John has to catch his cousin Olivia's baby. And he was quite traumatized over it, in a good way, but still traumatized. I think he would be quite wonderful as a midwife if he had to be. He can pretty much do anything, just like Jamie. At that, Claire returned the sapphire to John at Brianna's request. "Jilted by God," is all he had to say. So we don't get to see JB at all in this chapter. We just see Brianna and Lord John, and then Claire and Lord John. But they could see them from the window, and everything looked like it was going well. And I love that Claire ended up going to see Lord John first, so she could give him a physical and make sure everything was well. And it's very funny to me that Lord John would not tell her whether or not he had pooped today. You know, sometimes you can hear things when you listen to abdominal sounds or you palpate. It feels different if somebody hasn't pooped in quite a while. That's hilarious. But the fact that Lord John did this tremendous thing and stayed near Brianna and made sure that she was safe, and Aunt Jocasta was no longer parading her around like a prize mare, made things a little bit easier. And I love seeing the relationship continue to develop between Claire and Lord John. And now Brianna has her own relationship with him. And again, it's that thing of, how could you love something that wasn't yours? I don't know, people have always adopted others into their families. Always, through the centuries, since the beginning of time. And I still know people who have a hard time, and they don't know if they could love an adopted child as much. And as someone who is a stepchild, the grandparents of my step-grandparents is a better way of saying it. They never fully accepted us, ever. And it was that kind of thing, and I will never understand it. Their blood grandchildren, my stepmother's children, they were the most loving and kind and generous people too. To my brother and I, we were tolerated. But we were never really accepted and brought into the family our whole life. It's just such a strange thing, and I don't understand where that comes from. I'm a firm believer that relatives can be born in your heart, and it doesn't matter what womb they came out of. I sort of have friends that way. If you're an acquaintance long enough, either you stay an acquaintance or you become family. There's not a lot of in between with me. If I like you that much, you just get to be mine on some level. I'm all about that. So I don't know. And I wonder if that is something that Diana Gabaldon has seen or researched, that it was quite difficult for people to love someone who wasn't theirs. But there's a lot of adoption in these books, so I don't know. What do you think about that? Chapter 64, bottom of the 9th. Claire told Brianna labor is like a baseball game. It's mostly boring with bouts of activity. I like to say it has phases. Most of the labor a woman has more rest periods than work periods until near pushing, when the end of active labor requires more work and little rest to finish dilation and bring the baby down. I don't know. I don't know if the whole baseball analogy is quite right, but whatever. It works for Claire. Brianna mentioned beer and hot dogs in response. Jamie asked if he should fetch some small beer. I put a link in here for small beer. It is low alcohol content beer. We have no idea when it was originally brewed what the alcohol content was. It was usually after the third mash, I guess, is what it says. So water's been run through multiple times to make beer, from the heaviest to the lightest beer, and now we have mostly water with some alcohol in it. And it was for energy, so calories essentially. He then asked about a hot dog. Claire explained it was a sausage on a roll. Brianna didn't really want one. Women say things in labor. It doesn't mean you need to go fetch it for them. Jamie decided he should leave, but Brianna wouldn't let him. "Don't leave me!" she repeated, agitated. She leaned over and grabbed his arm, shaking it for emphasis. "You can't!" "You said I wouldn't die." She was staring intently into his face. "If you stay, it will be all right. I won't die." She spoke with such intensity that I felt a sudden spasm of fear clutch my own innards, hard as the pain of labor. Claire was gripped with worry, and her brain went haywire, thinking of how she almost died when she lost faith. By the way, that was a placental abruption that could not have been stopped or fixed at any time. She'd had a subchorionic hemorrhage in mid-second trimester that resulted in a full abruption in the 6th month of pregnancy. This kind of problem had nothing to do with her ability to carry a baby or birth. They sometimes happen without injury or accident. Claire prepared in her mind for how she would handle various situations that might arise during labor. Jamie was called into service to walk Brianna around the room like he would walk a horse with colic, to help distract her and progress labor. Claire opened the windows and took a moment to inhale the freshness of the outdoors. The house was in full anticipation and readiness for the birth. Claire contemplated how little needed to be done to support normal birth and how little could be done if it went wrong. Though even Claire had some mad skills to deal with the normal what-ifs for birth. Brianna wanted to lie down after walking for a long time. The labor was getting more intense and organized, Claire didn't think it would be much longer. Though 5 minutes apart is usually early labor, and it could last another 5 to 12 hours on average. Though home births, I will say, labor is generally much shorter overall than hospital deliveries. Even first-time moms I see have active labor to deliveries routinely of 4 to 6 hours. But early labor can last as long as it lasts. Sometimes it's a few hours of short, far-apart contractions, or it's a day as it slowly progresses and they get longer, stronger, and closer together. But they're not the hard contractions. They're 10, 15, 20 seconds long. I love how Brianna clings to Jamie and calls him Daddy. Brianna asked Jamie to tell her a story. He told her stories as she held on to him. Claire rubbed her back. They offered excellent labor support. Claire had Phaedra fill the room with candlelight to provide light since Brianna had started voluntarily pushing. Claire provided perineal massage with oiled fingers, though not necessary, but it would be usual for the training that she received at the time. The amniotic sac broke and the water splashed upon the bed and floor. The baby came down and Claire felt the head with her fingers. The ring of flesh opened suddenly and my fingers touched something wet and hard. Relaxation, and it moved back away, leaving the ends of my fingers tingling with the knowledge that I had touched someone entirely new. Once more the great pressure, the stretching came, and once more eased slowly back. I pushed back the edge of the shift, and with the next push the ring stretched to impossible size, and a head like a Chinese gargoyle popped out with a flood of amniotic fluid and blood. I found myself nose to nose with the waxy white head, with a face like a fist that grimaced at me in utter fury. "What is it? Is it a boy?" Jamie's hoarse question cut through my startlement. "I hope so," I said hastily, thumbing mucus from nose and mouth. "It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. God help it if it's a girl." Brianna made a noise that might have started as a laugh and turned into an enormous grunt of effort. I barely had time to get my fingers in and turn the wide shoulders slightly to help. There was an audible pop, and a long, wet form slithered out onto the soggy quilt, wriggling like a landed trout. Claire assessed the baby quickly. He was healthy and well. There was no sign of hemorrhage. I laid him on the bed, one hand on the bundle, as I checked Brianna. Her thighs were smeared with blood, but there was no sign of hemorrhage. The cord was still pulsing, a thick, wet snake of connection between them. She was panting, lying back on the crushed pillows, hair plastered wetly to her temples, an enormous smile of relief and triumph on her face. I laid a hand on her belly, suddenly flaccid. Deep inside, I felt the placenta give way, as her body surrendered its last physical link with her son. "Once more, honey," I said softly to her. The last contraction shivered over her belly, and the afterbirth slid out. I tied off the cord and cut it, and placed the solid little bundle of her child in her arms. "He's beautiful," I whispered. I left him to her and turned my attention to immediate matters, kneading her belly firmly with my fists to encourage the uterus to contract and stop bleeding. So this midwife is saying, "Well done!" That was a really great, straightforward delivery. It was a good description of what an unmedicated delivery looks like. And when we wait for voluntary pushing, or involuntary pushing, I guess, when a mother cannot help it, when her body just has that bearing down all by itself, then pushing doesn't last as long, hardly ever. Now, there are instances when a hand is up or the baby is sunny side up or other reasons why there'd be a premature reason to push or feeling to push. But in this instance, this is really what it looks like oftentimes. And we get something called the fetal ejection reflex, and we can't help it. The other thing that is so great about this scene is that Claire waited to cut the cord until after the placenta delivered. This gave an opportunity for the baby to receive the blood back into him from the placenta. Now, if you don't know, the reason it's so important to wait at least 1 minute before clamping a cord, better about 3 minutes, is because prior to delivery, baby sends upwards of 40% of his or her blood volume into the placenta. Why? Well, because that blood is oxygenated. It has catecholamines, endorphins, adrenaline, oxytocin, right? Baby has a tremendous amount of jobs to do right at delivery. In that first minute of life, baby's body has to all of a sudden shift from being on the mother's circulatory system to being on his or own system and to become an air breather and not a scuba diver anymore. So what happens is right at delivery, that blood that's been sent into the placenta rushes quickly back into baby in order to help baby transition and do all the work required in that first minute of life. It's an amazing system. Leave it. And when I catch a baby, we generally deliver the placenta and then just bag it up and put it next to the baby where it's not going to be making a mess. And we don't actually clamp and cut the cord until we do the newborn exam, the complete exam, which is about an hour and a half later. And some cultures don't cut the cord at all. It's called lotus birth. Look it up. It's pretty interesting. What we do is something like called a modified lotus because we don't cut it for a long time. And generally at 1 minute, the vast amount of blood is transfused back into baby already. But by 3 minutes, it's pretty well done for sure. And there are TED Talks available to watch that talk about that golden minute and how important it is. So if you're going to be donating cord blood, you should wait a minimum of 3 minutes to clamp and cut the cord. They'll still be able to get, 20, 30 mils maybe out of that cord. They do not need 100 mils. That is the baby's blood. It's not for science. It's for the baby. Anyway, there you have it. If you have more questions on that, you can leave me a voicemail at 719-425-9444 or drop me an email at contact@adramaofoutlander.com. The house was abuzz. Jamie was crying with joy. Brianna was grinning and putting him to breast right away. He latched without a problem and surprised Brianna with the force of it. Claire was crying too and realized it when she tasted tears when she smiled. The baby and Brianna were settled in, and Claire found Jamie, who had already gone to tell Lord John of the birth. They kissed, and afterward she noticed the marks on his hands from Brianna's nails. He drew me into his arms without a word and kissed me. As he let me go, I saw the deep red crescents of Brianna's nail marks on his hands, not yet faded. "You did brawly too," he whispered to me. Then the joy in his eyes bloomed bright and flowered in a face-splitting grin. "Granny." Oh, to call Claire Granny is so endearing. I will tell you, I didn't like that term of endearment for grandma until Outlander books. And I was like, yeah, Granny would be okay. Whatever the kid calls me. I'm not going to have any special name for myself. There's nothing wrong with being a grandma. Jamie was trying to figure out if the baby resembled Mackenzie or Bonnet. Claire said it was impossible to tell right now, and mentioned recessive genes. Jamie had no idea what she meant. She went on to explain the baby could be any color, and they wouldn't know for sure who the father was, and wondered aloud if it mattered. "Aye, well." Jamie's voice roused me some moments later. He sounded defiant. "If I didn't ken his father, At least, I'm sure, who his grandsire is. Yes, he's sure who his grandsire is. So am I, Grandpa. Hush up and go to sleep. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Jamie fell fast asleep, but Claire thought about why she said that phrase. It was something Frank always said. The air in the room was live. A light breeze stirred the curtains, and coolness touched my cheek. "Do you know?" I whispered, soundless. "Do you know she has a son?" Peace swept over Claire, and she slept. This is such a great birth scene. Thank you, Diana Gabaldon, for writing such a great birth scene. It's interesting how sometimes Claire goes back and her worries are compounded by things that don't even relate, like her placental abruption had nothing to do with her ability to birth. And like she was sure she was going to die when she was in labor with Brianna, but there was no reason to believe that. It was a low-risk physical pregnancy. Now, emotionally, I would say she was high risk because her mental health was so compromised having to return to her own timeline, right? But physically, there was nothing wrong. And she had a very straightforward, full-term normal delivery. She was not high risk because she had a subchorionic hemorrhage abruption that caused a fetal demise. So, anyway. I like how she does that, and then she gets it all up in her head and gets bonkers, but it was fine. And they did a really good job. Chapter 65, Return to Fraser's Ridge. Jamie, Claire, Brianna, nameless baby boy, and Lord John traveled together as far as they could. Lord John turned toward Virginia and William. "I'll trust you to care of them." Oh my goodness gracious. "I'll trust you to take care of them," he said quietly to me, with a nod toward the wagon, where two bright heads bent together in mutual absorption over the bundle in Brianna's lap. "You may," I said and pressed his hand. "I'll trust you too." He lifted my hand to his lips, briefly, smiled at me, and rode away without looking back. Again, there's this dynamic between them that is at once snarky, and they're always going to be like lobbing things at each other. And then on the other hand, it's really tender and loving and trusting. It's a fascinating relationship. The others kept on toward Fraser's Ridge for another week. Though the cabin was in disarray, the garden was a mess, and everything unkempt, Claire was the most joyful she had ever been at a homecoming. The baby not only didn't have a first name, but his last name was also under question. Everyone of the household and on the ridge called him a different name. Brianna was waiting for Roger to come before deciding what the baby would be called. Jamie was fed up with the waiting. "And if he doesna come? I expect the poor wee lad will go to his grave with no name at all. Christ, that lass is stubborn." "She trusts Roger. You might try to do the same." He gave me a sharp look. "There is a difference between trust and hope, Sassenach, and you ken that as well as I do." "Well, have a stab at hope then, why don't you?" "I would," he said, a shadow of humour in his eyes, "if I could decide whether to hope he comes or hope he does not." And why is Jamie still aggravated at Roger? They're the ones who left him and boogied out of there because Roger didn't have an immediate answer to Jamie's question after learning she was raped and the baby wasn't his and such, like, or possibly not his and such. I mean, come on. I'm just not quite sure. Claire was cranky, too, since the baby had kept everyone up from crying due to a diaper rash. She was trying to fill out the baby's birth certificate. She could fill in the date, approximate time, and who the attending doctor was. but no name as of yet. She and Jamie got sidetracked with names of saints. Gizmo. That will be a saint's name. I shouldn't think so, though you never know, what with people named Pantaleon and Onofrius or Feralus. Feralus? I didn't think I ken that one. Feralus is the patron saint of sick poultry, Christian martyr. He was a Roman tribune and a secret Christian. Having been found out, he was chained up in the prison cesspool to await trial. I suppose the cells must have been full. Sounds rather a daredevil. He slipped his chains and escaped through the sewer. They caught up with him, though, dragged him back and beheaded him. Jamie looked blank. What has that got to do with chickens? I haven't the faintest idea. Take it up with the Vatican, I advised him. Jamie goes on to tell her of the saint against impotence. Claire hit another problem with the birth certificate. What last name should she put for Brianna? Fraser? Randall? Or both? Claire decided to write both last names and to have faith Roger would come. Roger was preparing himself to ride up the path to Fraser's Ridge. He must have been a sight to see, but didn't think it mattered much. He passed through the clearing where he had met Jamie on that fateful day many months ago. The memory stabbed him, but nothing mattered because he was there. Well, that's interesting to me because remember when Jamie took young Ian home way back when in Voyager and he had him go and clean up first? And all the other instances in the books where before having to go and face someone, going and shaving and putting on a clean shirt and, getting your hair clean or taking a bath. And this is the instance where Roger didn't care. He didn't think it mattered whether he could shave or not. He had bathed the day before. He looked tattered. He couldn't really fix it. So I liked his matter-of-factness about it. And this little section is interesting. It's I guess it's a pivot point where we had to get everybody from point A to point B. So John was better and he could go back to Virginia. And the others traveled to the ridge. And I can't imagine having a baby that's that young and traveling for more than a week on horseback postpartum. That sounds freaking miserable. And I would not recommend it to my midwifery clients. No, you are not allowed to ride for more than a week on horseback when you were a week postpartum. I don't even know how long it was. It's just crazy. But Roger is there, and they don't know it yet, but Brianna has total faith that he's going to come. Claire has faith, and Jamie's just being fussy about it, as Jamie will be. So I have some emails and such. From a YouTube comment, Kiss Lena is her handle. Your insights on LJG are spot on. Any of us who've possessed an unrequited love understands his motivations completely and thoroughly. And yes, it's a protective barrier from real-time risky love. And yes, to kill it off is killing off a beautiful part of yourself. Wow. And it showed a tear face. And this was from Fighting Words, episode 145. Thank you. The next one is from Susan Stein. And this was, one of my favorite parts of Drums of Autumn is the part where Jamie and Claire are alone in building their home and starting their new life together. They really had to depend on themselves for everything. The nearest people were still very far away and hard to reach. I wonder if people today could live alone like that in the wilderness. Of course, Claire's medical training is very useful. It still seems hard to comprehend how far away they are from other people and how long it would take to reach them. Even someone as independent as Claire is lonely when Jamie is away. Yes, Susan, thank you. I agree with you. That would be lonely and strange and scary You have all this land that's yours, and you have all these animals to tend and all these things that have to be done. Maybe just the tasks of the days would make it easier because there's very little downtime except deep in winter when that daylight is short. And you might sleep a little bit more, but you still have to tend to the animals and such that you have. And then another YouTube comment. I'm so glad you're a midwife and all the sex ed talk. It's great. Smiley face. I don't get it at all why Bree would say the baby is his. Bonnet. It boggles my mind. And I also have a note from Kiss Lena, not to forget the link to the marriage podcast. I will put it in this week. I absolutely forgot to put it in last week. And then finally, the last one from Meredith of Everett, Washington. Dear Desiree, I do like the offer that Lord John makes to Brianna to buy her slaves should she inherit River Run. And I very much like that Lord John got to see Claire in her Indian garb. It would be strange to see on screen as well. In order to speed things up for the series, I predict that Roger will actually come back with Claire and Jamie instead of following a few days later. I'd prefer to have him there for the birth. In the show. I'd also like him to meet John as well. Oh, that's true. He's the one of them that doesn't know John and have that connection. So there are exactly 2 episodes left in this book. How is that to be? That is wild, isn't it? So we're doing chapters 66 and 67 next week, and then the final 4, because they're not long, the following week. It's very strange as I'm typing up show notes that I have the page numbers, that say 1012 in my notes. It's phenomenal. I can't believe we made it this far. And it's just so exciting to getting to that point. And we only have 6 chapters left, and Roger is just now returning. So they've been apart for the bulk of the book. And so now that Bonnet has disappeared, wonder where the heck he is and what's going on with that. How is he going to come into play again? Lord John went back to Virginia to be with William and run his property. How long is Lord John going to stay in the colonies? Is he going to go back to England? Is he going to take up another commission in the army? I don't know. How are things going to change when Roger comes back? That is a very delicate situation. And now Roger's having to straddle that 20th century man with the 18th century things that need to be done. And Brianna not wanting a marriage of obligation, I get that. I don't think you can have a good marriage without obligation. You can't. You have to have love and obligation because there's a lot of tough times. I know many of you have been married for many years, just like I have. We're on 24 this November. And without obligation, there's no way we'd still be together. Nope. Because when that initial passion, that burn wears off and it becomes just the glowing coals that keep everything steady and warm, you have to have a lot more dedicated to keeping a marriage together. Yes. And marriages were made from obligation since the beginning of time for protection and safety. And there you have it. But I would not want a marriage only of obligation. I mean, if that's not something I chose to do, I didn't walk into it knowing that we were getting married for a purpose. We needed to join households for a particular reason, and it was a valid reason for both of us, but eyes wide open, right? Like, I wouldn't want that if I knew what else it could be. I wouldn't want that with my husband if I knew it could be the way our marriage is now. And Brianna seeing the difference, and Claire and Frank had a decent marriage. It was a marriage of obligation, and it was a marriage of a different kind of love. And it was valid, and it wasn't easy. but they made it work. And geez, Brianna knew nothing different until she was told. That tells me they were highly successful at what they were doing, right? So she still has some learning to do, and she has a lot of healing. Thankfully, she had Lord John to heal with. She had some healing with Jamie. She had her mom, who helped her with lots of other things. But then she went and saw Bonnet, and I still don't know what that was. Everything I get from you guys, you don't understand what that was either and why she would do that. I really think with Brianna, I think she might be a half glass empty kind of person a little bit. Not totally, but she errs on the side of the worst case in order to protect herself. I mean, I totally get that. So, what do y'all think? Again, it's 719-425-9444, or the email is contact@adramaofoutlander.com. Okay, so go to Facebook, join the group, A Dram of Outlander. I have a couple of awesome admins on there. Jan and Patricia, they're amazing. I put content, but it's really for you guys to interact and talk about all things Outlander, things related to Outlander, other things, not even Outlander, but just bring us together as a group, because Outlander is like, hi, you like Outlander too? Now we're friends. So we're just continuing the community aspect of it. And it's a great community. Everybody gets along well, and everybody can have in-depth conversations and really just discuss and share themselves and reveal what they think without having to worry about getting jumped on by other people. Y'all are nicely mature. You can go to the page and like it, A Dram of Outlander. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Dram of Outlander without the A in front. Of course, the website is adramaofoutlander.com. I know, you're shocked. But you can really help the podcast by, if you listen through Apple Podcasts, please go into iTunes and leave a 5-star review. That helps people find me. Spotify, you can also leave a review. Google Play as well. So it takes just seconds to do it. And I really appreciate it. And I need you to do it. It helps people find me. Helps people want to listen if other people say it's good, right? The other way that you can really support the podcast is, like today, I had so many comments and emails to read. I love your input. I want to hear. I want to know what you think. What do you think of the new music and the new intro? I love it. I needed to just spruce it up a little bit. And I want to hear your voices. I do this. Originally, it was just for me, but I do it every week for you. Because you listen, and you are on this journey with me, and it's exciting. Oh, yes, and remember that we are going to do the space between right on the heels of Drums of Autumn. That'll be our filler novella between ending DOA and the show. Oh, yes, which we know for sure is airing November 4th in the United States, and I believe Canada as well. Yay! November 4th, that's your day. And it'll be 12 episodes. And then right after that, we're going to be doing the Fiery Cross, and it will take us a long time. You thought you were with me a long time here. It's going to take probably an extra 8 weeks to get through, because it's really, really a big book. And the last way that you can help support the podcast, of course, is financially. Patreon.com/adramaofoutlander. Or if you want to make a one-time offering and not commit to a monthly offering, you can simply drop me an email at contact@adramaofoutlander.com, and I'll tell you how. Every penny counts. Every dollar counts. I do this whole thing by myself. And I need you to help me keep it moving forward. So, I appreciate you as always. And thank you for listening. And until next time, Slán Java.